Welcome to World War II Indiana Landmarks, Episode 15, the USS Indianapolis Memorial in Indianapolis. I'm your host, Ron May, author of the book, World War II Indiana Landmarks. The USS Indianapolis Memorial is located in downtown Indianapolis along the Canal Walk. Commissioned in 1932, the USS Indianapolis was a heavy cruiser active in the Pacific Theater during World War II. She was named for the city of Indianapolis. In her first years, she was the flagship for President Roosevelt and also the Secretary of the Navy. The happy crew on the Indianapolis was made up of 1,196 men who came from different parts of the United States to form a cohesive team. The ship's crew also included a Marine Corps detachment of 39 men. The commanding officer of the ship was Captain Charles B. McVay III. He was born into a proud lineage of naval service. His father had been a rear admiral in the Navy, and Charles followed in that service. He took command of the Indianapolis in November of 1944. The Indianapolis participated in most sea battles and in support of most island invasions in the Pacific. She earned 10 battle stars for her war service in the Aleutians, the Gilbert and Marshall Islands, Saipan, the Battle of the Philippine Sea, Tinian, Guam, the Carolines, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa. Like many ships, she suffered her share of tragedy during the war. Following a Japanese aerial bomb attack off Okinawa, the Indianapolis was hit on March 31, 1945. 9 men died and were subsequently buried at sea. The damaged ship left for Mare Island, San Francisco, in the United States for repairs. After her overhaul, Indianapolis received orders to undertake a top-secret mission of the utmost significance to national security to proceed to Tinian Island, carrying the enriched uranium, at that time about half of the world's supply, and other parts required for the assembly of the atomic bomb codenamed Little Boy, which would be dropped on Hiroshima a few weeks later. No one on board the ship, including Captain McVay, knew that the secret cargo it unloaded on Tinian was half the uranium and parts of the atomic bomb Little Boy that would soon be dropped over Hiroshima on August 6th. After a brief stop in Guam, the Indianapolis received orders and proceeded unescorted toward Leyte in the Philippine Islands. While the ship was crossing the Philippine Sea, about halfway between Guam and Leyte, the Imperial Japanese submarine I-58 spotted and subsequently torpedoed the ship. The submarine was commanded by Machitsura Hashimoto. The enemy submarine fired 6 torpedoes at the Indianapolis, 2 of which made contact and ripped open the ship, allowing seawater to rush into and fill the internal compartments. Within 12 minutes, the Indianapolis was swallowed by the sea. Of the 1,196 men on board, 300 of them went down with the ship. Just over 900 men abandoned the ship before she was swallowed by the sea. And there they languished for the next 4 nights and 5 days while trying to stay alive. The Indianapolis was not reported missing when it failed to arrive in Leyte Gulf as scheduled on July 31st. Adding to the tragedy for the men in the water, the ship's SOS signals, which were sent out just before she sank, were dismissed by 3 different Navy shore communication stations. Within their first 24 hours in the water, hundreds of sharks began to harass and attack the men. Many died from these vicious shark attacks, although the exact number is not known. During the survivors' 4th day at sea, Lieutenant J.G. Wilbur Chuck Gwynn, flying a PV-1 Ventura with a crew of 5, miraculously spotted some of the men in the water. It occurred while he was troubleshooting a loose radio cable at the back of the plane. He looked down and noticed an oil slick, and then saw groups of men floating. He radioed in the coordinates for rescue efforts to commence. The first person to offer direct aid to the men's plight was Pilot Lieutenant Adrian Marks, a Frankfort, Indiana native, who was flying a PBY Catalina amphibious plane. Disobeying direct orders, he landed his plane in the dangerous waters to assist the floating survivors. He and his crew rescued 56 of the stranded men, many of whom were lashed to the wings of the plane while they awaited rescue by ship. Marks became one of the rescuers' heroes. His hometown of Frankfort, Indiana, honors him today on a mural painted on one of the downtown buildings. Rescue for the survivors finally came the next day from several ships which steamed to the area, but by that time, almost 5 days after the sinking, the majority of men had already perished. Of the almost 900 men who made it into the water after the sinking of their ship, only 317 survived, making this the worst sea disaster in U.S. Navy history. Captain McVeigh, who had made it to one of the life rafts, was among the survivors. The rescued men were in bad shape, and some required many months of hospitalization before they could return home. The survivors were taken to 2 area island base hospitals for medical treatment: Fleet Hospital 114 at Samar and Base Hospital No. 20 at Peleliu. The survivors came back to the United States on the USS Hollandia, arriving at the port of San Diego in September 1945. By then, Japan had surrendered and the war was over. News of the sinking of the Indianapolis, however, wasn't released until Japan's surrender. Sadly, the tragedy didn't end there. Navy leadership, not wishing to accept responsibility for its role in the worst naval disaster, decided to pin blame on Captain McVeigh. In November 1945, just 2 months after he returned home, McVeigh was court-martialed on 2 charges: failing to order his men to abandon ship and hazarding the ship by failing to zigzag. He was cleared of the charge of failing to order abandon for the ship, but he was convicted of hazarding his ship by his failure to continue zigzagging. Shockingly, Commander Machatsura Hashimoto, commanding officer of the Japanese I-58 submarine that sank the Indianapolis, was subpoenaed to be a witness at McVeigh's court-martial. He testified, however, that zigzagging would have made no difference. He would have still been able to sink the ship. Hashimoto later became a Shinto priest at a shrine in Kyoto, Japan. In 1960, at the survivors' first reunion held in Indianapolis, McVeigh accepted the invitation of his crew to be present. His former shipmates welcomed him warmly, but it was clear to all of them that he was still haunted by the losses and the continued correspondence from grieving families. He never returned to another reunion. Tragically, he committed suicide at the age of 70 in 1968. The survivors continued to meet every 5 years for a reunion in Indianapolis. They put their focus and energy toward preserving the legacy of their ship and crew by having a memorial built. After years of effort to find property for the memorial, they accepted a donation of land from the mayor of Indianapolis along the developing canal in downtown Indianapolis and dedicated it on July 30, 1991. Indianapolis native James "Jimmy" O'Donnell was the only survivor from Indianapolis and spent the next 4 years helping to raise money for the memorial by giving talks throughout the area. He was later honored with his own statue outside of City Market in downtown Indianapolis. The dedication for the USS Indianapolis Memorial on July 30th, 1995, drew approximately 3,500 people, including 107 of the survivors who came to see the unveiling of this memorial created by Joseph Fisher. Unknown to many, a part of the USS Arizona's bridge or superstructure was buried underneath the USS Indianapolis Memorial. The two sunken ships became bookends to the start and end of World War II. The USS Indianapolis Memorial is located along the Canal Walk in downtown Indianapolis. Fisher used black and gray granite pieces to fashion the 21-ton structure into the general shape of a Navy ship. He pointed the bow of the ship westward toward the Pacific Ocean to honor the ship's crew who died in the middle of the Philippine Sea. He placed the structure of the ship on a base of Indiana limestone. Fisher adorned the black granite face of the memorial with a detailed silhouette of the USS Indianapolis. He wrapped the text of the USS Indianapolis story around the 28-feet-long base of the memorial. The north side of the base presents the general information on the ship, such as construction details, physical dimensions, engine type, armament description, and her honorable resume of service in the Navy from 1932 to 1945. On the back of the memorial, he included the names of the entire crew of 1,197 men on board the ship at the time of her sinking, each name engraved with 1-inch letters, and the survivors noted by the placement of a star beside their names. The text on the south side of the base, underneath the names of the ship's crew, summarized the tragic events that led to her sinking on July 30, 1945, and to the long ordeal for those who made it off the ship and attempted to survive in the water. Fisher cut into the base of the memorial 10 stars to represent the 10 battle stars the Indianapolis received for her war service. Directly behind the granite ship, Fisher placed a high curved wall to represent the ship's bridge. It serves as an overlook for the memorial. Wishing to remember all who served in their theater of war, the survivors of the Indianapolis dedicated their memorial to all who served in the Pacific Theater. Following the dedication of their memorial, the survivors began gathering for biannual memorial services as part of their reunion activities. I've had the distinct honor of participating in several of those memorial services. The survivors sought throughout their lifetimes to get their captain exonerated from his conviction at the court-martial in 1945. It finally happened in July 2001. Today, only one of the men remains alive of the 316 who survived, Harold Bray of California. Just a few blocks beyond the USS Indianapolis Memorial is the USS Indianapolis Museum exhibit that was added to the Indiana War Memorial in July 2007. It features many fine exhibits of the ship, including a large map showing the service routes of the Indianapolis during her war service, information boards on the ship and her missions, as well as information on the pilots who were responsible for locating the survivors, and even some paintings from local artist John Gramosiak, who was instrumental in capturing some of the scenes of the rescue. You will also see some ship's artifacts and personal items of some of the sailors. One of those exhibits is a display of a summer white uniform belonging to Thomas Leon Barksdale of Seymour, Indiana. Barksdale made it off the ship on July 30 when it was attacked by the torpedoes of the submarine, but he died later in the water. His body was located during rescue efforts, and he was then weighed down for sea burial. There is also a very impressive recreation of the USS Indianapolis radio compartment on the main floor of the Indiana War Memorial. In May 2011, The I-465 beltway around Indianapolis was officially named the USS Indianapolis Memorial Highway. In August of 2017, billionaire Paul Allen's search crew aboard the research vessel Petrel discovered the location of the sunken Indianapolis 3 miles down in the Philippine Sea. The wreck was revealed to the public a month later, on September 13th. She and the 300 members of her crew remain there today, 78 years after her sinking. The newest and fourth USS Indianapolis is LCS-17, a littoral combat ship which was commissioned in Burns Harbor, Indiana on October 26, 2019. One of the survivors of the heavy cruiser that was sunk during World War II was in attendance for that ceremony. And so, the legacy of the USS Indianapolis continues today. Learn more about the history of the USS Indianapolis Memorial and those who served on her in my new book, World War II Indiana Landmarks, available for purchase on my website or wherever books are sold. And while on my website, check out my trilogy of Indiana World War II service stories. Thanks for tuning in to this episode.